ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
Hi, this is Grace.
And with us is a guy. Well, he's not any ordinary guy. He actually is one of the key member or council member for the ASEAN-BAC or ASEAN Business Advisory Council. So who is the guy in our office here? Gowri.
Well, we have Mr. Syed Nabil. Let's say good morning to him.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, good morning, ladies.
So, of course, you are listening to DurianASEAN.com, the voice of discovery and sharing. And today we will be talking about the youth involvement in entrepreneurship and also in the context of ASEAN itself.
Yeah, especially in the context of ASEAN, because whenever we talk about youth entrepreneurship, which has become such a widespread ideas and topic among the younger generation. A lot of the younger generations are looking at setting up their own business, but majority of them are looking only at the Malaysian context. On a regional context, actually, there are challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities untapped.
Definitely, there will be more opportunities, and then there will be more youth participants doing the activities under this ASEAN. And ASEAN-BAC definitely recognizes the talent and the need to establish the platform for all these youth in the Malaysian as well as ASEAN regions.
And this is where the ASEAN Business Advisory Council comes in. And with Syed Nabil, you represent the youth section of the ASEAN-BAC. How is it being a young person among all these old guns? Hope they didn't shoot you down. You are a young guy.
It's definitely an interesting experience. I've learned a lot from my involvement with them. And, I look forward to, I believe in the cause that they're pushing for. I think ASEAN represents the future of the region, specifically for Malaysia as well as all the other member countries. And as they try to formulate and put this into form, I'm just proud and happy to be able to be part of it. So yeah, of course, I'm occasionally the one who they choose to go fetch the coffee or
so you become the secretary.
Yeah, and maybe that's the reason why I was made secretary. But I'm happy to be part of that group.
But how is it like being part of the younger generation?
And how did you get involved with ASEAN-BAC in the first place? Maybe a little background to that as well?
Oh yeah, that'll be interesting.
Well, I would say ASEAN work. Well, as a student, when I first came back, I went into private equity structuring. And what this boutique equity firm that I worked for wanted to do was invest in more better emerging markets. They are small boutique equity firm. So in Malaysia, although they've invested heavily in healthcare, value-added or services-specific businesses, they wanted to expand. So we did some market research and we saw a lot of potential in ASEAN, and that's how I came across ASEAN, to be honest. And luckily for me, my father was also very actively involved in ASEAN, and although he's fully retired now, since I have become actively involved, he has been retired since 2012 actually. I still go to him for advice and opinions and all that, but the interest definitely stemmed from the market potential and how it slowly became clear to me that it is definitely the future for ASEAN and Malaysia specifically, and also, maybe something that my father was involved in. So,
talking about ASEAN, as we all know, next year will be the biggest challenge that Malaysia would face, because we will be the chairman or the chair for the ASEAN Economic Community, and also the ASEAN integration will come to life. But in reality, there's just a lot of things that needs to be figured out, needs to be smoothened out. So what's your view in terms of the prospect of future of the ASEAN economy when it comes to how much of it will actually benefit the younger generation and SMEs in specific?
Well, okay. Speaking of the ASEAN economy, which I think what the Business Advisory Council is meant to represent and advocate anyways, we're guided by the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint, as you guys know.
We just discussed about it.
Yeah, in 2007. And what this means is to integrate all 10 economies into a single market and production base. And by virtue of this, the ASEAN economy as a whole is relatively huge. And what we're talking about, the 7th largest economy in the world, combined GDP of 2.5 trillion, population of 620 million people, rising demand for consumer goods and services, and intra-ASEAN trade at this point is relatively low. I think it averages out about 25%, which means that ASEAN countries, as much as their production is increasing, trade activities between ASEAN countries in itself still has a lot of room for improvement. But having said that, with the increase or more accessibility to an enlarged market, there will be huge potential for new businesses, existing SMEs for development and everything else. But having said that, you mentioned a good point. 2015 is supposed to be the formation year of the ASEAN Economic Community. I think if you ask me personally what I feel about the AEC in 2015 is, I think 2015 is more a milestone achievement. I think a lot of recognition needs to be given to the progress that have been made. Say, for example, 99.6% of tariffs has been removed for trade activities under the ASEAN Free Trade Area. The MRAs, mutual recognition agreements between for services, are also making headway. But there are still a lot of internal housekeeping for ASEAN to deal with.
But is it fast enough to prepare businesses to go or tap into the ASEAN market? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to create a situation where the ASEAN economic community is just an idea, but in reality is somehow is just far-fetched, a very far-fetched idea.
Okay, I think obviously we could be moving a lot faster. Yeah, but having said that, also I think there is a need for us to understand what is ASEAN and on what bearing do we actually work on. Say, for example, a lot of people make comparisons to the EU, where there is an enforced commission. So meaning the EU Commission in Brussels, they have a right to impose law and everything else on countries and private sector individuals and everyone else. But in ASEAN, they work on the basis of consensus. So the Secretariat in Jakarta, what they do is they try to do as many negotiations and roundtable discussions as possible and reach a particular consensus. I don't think, of course, we want to do it as fast as possible, as I said, but it's not at the expense of lack of regulations or lack of coordination. I think the most important thing for ASEAN to do is actually to make sure all the 10 countries are equally competitive, meaning to reduce the development gap, as well as at the same time to be able to work seamlessly together and as an integrated single unit. And only through that can we be compatible with the global economy.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is like the biggest challenge for 10 economies from 10 different countries to come together? I'm sure there's a lot, but what would probably be the biggest concern?
Well, I think the main obstacle for ASEAN companies is the internationalization of their businesses, meaning to look beyond their borders. Say, for example, you mentioned something to do with the SMEs earlier, and it's true. ASEAN is very SME-centric. 97.3% of the total economy is controlled by the SMEs or represented
in Malaysia.
SMEs. No, this is in ASEAN.
Oh, in ASEAN.
Yeah. In Malaysia, it's also a similar
about
figure.
the same, yeah.
Yeah. But this is averaged out because, say, for example, Myanmar, they might have less SMEs. I think they are at 88% of their economy. But then you balance it out with Indonesia, which is at essentially 99.9% of the economy is SMEs.
Including the bakso guy selling on the street.
Yeah. Would you believe it or not? And that's micro SMEs, and I think we have a lot of that also in Malaysia. So connectivity between these businesses is one of the most important things. I think one of the main obstacles that we have is for ASEAN businesses to look to their neighbours a lot more than to look beyond, and that would be the number one challenge. And what do the challenges come with? Meaning to say, okay, challenges of internationalization is maybe in terms of regional cooperative work. It would be maybe regulatory framework, conducive regulatory framework, access to finance, market access, market information, infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure, harmonization of standards. So these will be some of the issues that need to be ironed out.
These are very vague and dry terms for probably the lady selling nasi lemak down the street might not get it, But if I want to give an analogy, since we are talking about youth in entrepreneurship, let's say you have a Malay kid. Probably he wants to promote his Ramly burger outside of Malaysia. So if you want to use the kind of terms that you described just now, and to somehow describe a situation where he can actually use this platform or use this different access to promote Ramly burger outside of probably Sentul, the area of Sentul, how would that look like?
Yeah. This is obviously a very relevant question, and I feel very passionate about it. I'm a strong advocate of e-commerce and IT development, especially when it comes to young entrepreneurs. Funny story you mentioned about
because I love Ramly burger. So.
The Ramly burger situation is. Let me give an example. I know these technical terms can be dry, so maybe I can put it just in a simple layman's perspective. Near my office in Jalan Ipoh, there is this row of shop lots, and we own one of the shop lots. We don't use it. We want to lease it out, right? So what happened was there's this chap who's an Indian immigrant, from India, who moved to Malaysia some 15 years ago. Okay, and he's an Indian Muslim, now running a mamak shop. His own full-blown mamak shop. Now he came and he wanted to rent our shop lot. So I said, okay, why do you want to rent our shop lot for? And then he said, because we want to use it as storage space. I said, you wanna put your mamak food stuff in my shop lot? I might not feel too comfortable with it. It's on the first floor and stuff like that, So he said, no. We want to store my stock for a separate business that I'm doing. I said, separate business. What are you doing besides this mamak shop? I'm interested. He sells the butang baju Melayu, the buttons that you have for the baju Melayu.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, yeah. So I said, that's interesting. How is it that you sell this butang baju Melayu? He said, I sell it online. And I said, okay, that's very interesting. And obviously it's in Malaysia, right? That's your biggest market. He said, no. My biggest market is in Indonesia, because it doesn't have to be for baju Melayu. So I said, you have no business. You cannot speak Bahasa Indonesia. Right? Maybe you speak Bahasa Malaysia, but maybe not so good, right? But you have this market in Indonesia that is big enough for you to pay up to 10,000 ringgit a month just for warehouse space. I mean, that in itself shows potential in what this guy has done. And he doesn't know the slightest thing about IT or anything like that. But he uses IT, the internet, as a marketing tool, and he's done that.
Does he have his own website, or it's just through Facebook?
He used Facebook. He went on Muda. And he did some research on Indonesian e-commerce websites. He's now with Zalora, Lazada. I mean, he's
now we are in MV. Zalora.
Yeah, so he's expanded his business, and this is also something that the young entrepreneurs should look into. You have instant marketing access. Obviously, I mean, with every business endeavor, you will have barriers.
I'm sure you meet a lot of young, enthusiastic, passionate young people just want to do something in terms of starting up their own business. But what is your general observation, the kind of like stumbling blocks or the kind of attitude that they usually would have when they start up their business? I guess in the Malaysian context first.
Okay. In the Malaysian context, entrepreneurship, I think in general, what people need to be able to understand first off is it is an extra activity. It is a personal project. So you should not wait till you find the time to do it. You have a day job. I mean, obviously, you need to survive day to day. But if you want to go into entrepreneurship, you want to own your own businesses, you want to be in charge of your future, it's something that you have to work on in your time. And you have to make time for that. And that's one of the key blocks when people say, a lot of young entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs who say to me that, we just don't have the time, my boss is running me ragged and stuff like that. Well, you got to have to make your own time, a lot to do with fact finding as well. This is where the government can also play a role, especially when it comes to SME development in ASEAN. Market information. People want to go into business, but they don't know what's out there, what they can cater to. They need to have access to this information. And further to that, incentives. In ASEAN, we have what you call the PIS, or Priority Integration Sectors. These are 11 subsectors that you can look on the internet. Has a lot of several other subsectors that you can look into, and these are encouraged sectors where you will receive some form of assistance. So a lot of entrepreneurs nowadays, they don't realize that there is assistance from the government in Malaysia to do business, but maybe there is a lack of awareness. Information is not made readily available, and I don't blame the entrepreneurs as well. So I hope this can be rectified by the government. Sometimes you say, okay, it's with you've got seed funding with this bank or this agency or this development corporation, stuff like that, and then you go online and there's none of that information available. You go in there, you meet with some of the officers, and it's as if they're hearing it for the first time. I mean, it's ridiculous to some extent, and this obviously needs to be rectified. So in a nutshell, it's about making your own time, being passionate about it, and really wanting to see it become a reality.
Even though you don't have enough funding or you haven't found that financial support yet.
Well, again, it depends on what you want to do. If you really want to do it, then you have to look for alternative financing. Quite interesting when it comes to alternative financing. We cannot look at things. Not everyone was born rich. For us to be successful in business, it doesn't mean that we have to have money. We have to find alternative means, just like how we find alternative means to have fun, to enjoy ourselves, to find good food, or to look for a good place to live. It's the same thing for business. Of course, you look for whatever capital raising that you can, but nowadays, even then, alternative access to financing is an interesting topic to go into. How this relates to ASEAN is microfinancing. A lot of people in the villages, in the rural areas, in the Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, the 4 countries, they talk about them even worse. They don't have a regulated banking structure. They don't have any recourse.
But even in the
financing.
Malaysian context, we actually interviewed someone who was doing some charity work or some social work with a low-wage earner, and it's a community actually. It seems like a lot of them have to resort to borrowing from this informal financing sector, like Along, for example. Like because of that, they are always in a cycle of debt that they cannot get off from.
Of course. I mean, no one should borrow from Along. First of all, even if it's a case of life and death. But obviously some people are cornered and put into particular situations where they don't have any other option. But having said that, there are numerous other options that you can look into. I mean, legitimately. Of course, when you go to a commercial bank, they would expect you to have good business practices, good business profile, a good expansion program, and everything else. So that is also something that's important. You want to start a business, you need to know how to start a business. Meaning to say, you need to at least organize books. Very interesting story. Nowadays, you need to have a credit history. Very interesting story is that a lot of people in the kampongs nowadays, they don't even utilize their bank accounts. So the banks don't know that they're there. They don't know the kind of money that they're dealing with. It's not because they don't qualify, but because they're not registered in the system. They need to be registered in the system. So good accounting practices is also that's important. Management accounting, good bookkeeping. These are things that would actually work with development banks. Malaysia has a lot of development banks, and that you can utilize from low interest and everything else. Again, I go back to this alternative financing. You've got crowdfunding now, angel investors, you've got venture capitalists, PE companies like the ones I work for. You know, as long as you've got a good business model, you can instill faith and trust in another person to invest in you. I think.
Or you have your Pama parents and your Pama.
Well, you know, at some point, I think you would want to give back rather than just extricate more from that particular account. I think a lot of us want.
But again, when it comes to like especially entrepreneurs, they always face the challenge financially. You see, they have the plans, but they don't know how to execute it. Like always, the execution is the problem, and it's also a matter of how they are educated in terms of knowledge and information. And like you mentioned that. Surprisingly, even if the entrepreneurship in Malaysia or Indonesia could be high, but then the amount of information they can get from the government or the online is still lacking.
Yeah.
So you said it should be rectified, but then what is your view on this? How would you actually move forward to be able to educate people to step into this proper entrepreneurship?
Well, at the council level, what we're actively trying to do in engaging the private sector is to create more awareness activities, workshops on good business practices, access to market information for ASEAN economy. So it's not just about the Malaysian economic landscape, but also ASEAN economic landscape. We're also conducting workshops on good business practices, which is like, you know, to encourage them to do bookkeeping, maintaining a bank account, regularly servicing their existing debts, learning to separate what is personal financing and company financing, capital raising, provisions for capital, stuff like that. These are things that we are trying to do in terms of engaging the private sector. What we urge the government to do is to increase efficiency in terms of registering businesses, maybe integrate the registration of businesses with maybe development funds. Meaning to say, if you walk into the registrar companies, instead of you just registering your company, you also know about certain encouraged industries where there is seed capital for, or startup funds for, which you have under SME Bank, under Prime Minister's Department. You have a lot of them, but they're not integrated. So you need to go to a bit more of a one-stop shop, if I may say. So you also have certification centers, so you can expose them to whatever certifications that they can get to develop their business, or what particular business that you want to go into, and these are the certifications involved, stuff like that. I think that would help a lot. In terms of capital raising, like I said, it's a joint responsibility, because it's not about an entrepreneur gaining good access to finance, but it's in actual fact for an entrepreneur to have access to finance and to be productive with that finance. Otherwise, you just keep, disbursing funds to a whole bunch of people who don't know how to conduct business, and you end up on the losing end anyways.
And having said that, do you think that anyone can become an entrepreneur?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think there are certain qualities that they need to have?
So eventually the world will replace all those employees with entrepreneurs.
I believe entrepreneurship is something to do with human capital development, and then this goes under the socio-cultural pillar. A lot of people say that the private, in terms of engaging the ASEAN community, the ASEAN economic community, or the private sector for the economic community, is the primary driver for integration for the other two pillars, which is the political security pillar and the socio-cultural pillar. I believe entrepreneurs can come in various forms.
Yeah, you have remember the story that you say, the Indian Muslim migrant?
Yeah. And from a socio-cultural perspective, it means that you can also be a loner, you can be a European, you can be Asian.
You can be a lady like us.
You can be a lady, you can be anyone. And you will all have your strengths. Some people have so many friends, and somehow or other they start business from that. And when some others, they are loners and they start businesses from that because of the determination, the time they've got to spare and everything else.
And also the kind of products they want to, or services they want to push forward.
Yeah. I think Grace highlighted a good point just now. One of the key elements to be a good entrepreneur, if you ask me, is exposure. Don't be cocooned. The Malays will say, katak bawah tempurung. And there are a lot who are doing that. We need to engage with one another a lot more. We need to know a lot more about what's going on out there. We have to make an active effort to find out as much as possible, and then we can make a better educated decision. Even before we make a statement as entrepreneurship is hard. It's an educated decision, not something that we heard from other people's experiences and what they've got to say about it. One other thing about the access to finance that I wanted to highlight also, because again, I acknowledge full well that access to finance is a key area. There's only so much of your personal finances you can invest in your business, right? You can channel all the energy that you can. But you don't have more capital, it's going to be a problem. So maybe something else that the government can look at is look at the sustainability of the business model. I spoke about how you need to come up with a good business proposal, right? Professionalism needs to be shown. Good business practices needs to be shown in your proposal. But in showing that proposal also, maybe the government agencies, say for example for SMEs, the SME agencies can take into consideration through credit guarantee so that they can still go to the commercial banks, but is guaranteed by the government to whatever extent. So interest rate can drop, or they can disburse the funds for startup themselves. But having said that, they can look for sustainability, meaning to say for short-term loans. Maybe that's something they should not cater to. Maybe that is something that the entrepreneurs can go to commercial banks. But even then, maybe a letter of recommendation, support, whatever it is that you can extend to them. But for long-term sustainability, you can give them soft loans. You can give them grants. Quite an interesting project that I worked on personally was that I worked on a pilot project. We wanted to bring a new technology into Malaysia. This I don't mind sharing with you guys. It was to do with sterilization. Previously, one of the companies we took over was sterilization. Sterilization of medical supplies. So surgical gloves, catheters, syringes, they have to be 100% or 99.9% sterile. And what they used to use was nuclear energy. And there was only one company that has that in Malaysia. And we used to own that company. And it was a cash cow, no doubt, because there was a monopoly, right? Malaysia, Top Glove and Supermax and B-Bron and all these companies, they produce massive amounts of surgical equipment. And we provide a local destination to service this so that they can be medically fit for use, right? So we wanted to shift from nuclear energy to electricity. So we did not have to go through all the hassle and trouble in procuring plutonium or uranium or whatever have you to make this cobalt-60 to sterilize the products. So what I did was I went to the government through Malaysian Technology Development Corporation and said, this is the new technology that I want to bring in. I go see Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation and say that I need a grant because I need this to be pioneer status company, because this is something new. I have to convince my market, I have to convince my suppliers, things of that nature. So there are these opportunities for you to look into as well. So there are provisions for it. We just need to go out there and we just need to look into it. And hopefully also for them to meet us halfway, for the public sector to just, market it a lot more, right? I mean, we're not talking about it often enough, right?
That's true. We are not talking about it often enough. We'll take a short break. When we return, we will discuss more about youth entrepreneurship in the ASEAN context.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And we are back again with our discussion on youth entrepreneurship in the ASEAN context. And with us, of course, is Syed Nabil. And you are from ASEAN-BAC, as you earlier explained. Just continuing from our discussion when it comes to youth being in business. But for youth in the ASEAN context, let's forget about Malaysia entirely, because I believe you probably have met a lot of young people from Southeast Asia. Probably their challenges in terms of starting up business, maintaining business, and become successful eventually would probably have a different kind of reality than youth probably in Malaysia. So if you can share with us some stories that that youth in other Southeast Asian countries are facing and how they overcome all this.
Sure. Young entrepreneurship in ASEAN. Okay. I think some of the common factors from the people that I've met and the feedback that I've gotten from them is they have the normal business constraints. access to raw material, affordable or cheap raw material. When it comes to expanding their businesses, they have a lack of access to skilled labor, obviously capital, market access, meaning to say they don't know enough about the market that they want to go into, logistics. These are common business issues that they have. In terms of development of their businesses also. So let's say, for example, I've got this one chap who developed the Yellow Pages in Myanmar.
Oh.
And now he wants to go into e-commerce in Myanmar, but he has not managed to break through yet. And these are strong business potentials. So if you ask me, I mean, Myanmar's population, just to give everyone a picture, is 80 million people in comparison to our 13 million. So big consumer base. Of course, maybe purchasing power there is poorer, but the population is big. In Indonesia, say for example, population of 300 million, young entrepreneurs is considered a very big demographic in Indonesia. I think it's almost like a political activity. People who are strong activists in the young entrepreneurs group, they eventually can climb up the corporate political ladder in Indonesia relatively. I mean, they've got a head start at least, and they've got their issues: competition, lack of government assistance, combined with the normal business constraints that they have. So, for example, they wanna bring a lot of things into Malaysia, or they want to take a lot of Malaysian products into Indonesia or into Myanmar, and they don't have access. They don't have network. So they wanna increase connectivity. That is the gist of what I see from them.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to success stories, do you think any of these Southeast Asian nations actually have created more young entrepreneurs? If you want to make comparison between different ASEAN countries.
Well, comparatively, I think having a big young entrepreneurs movement does not translate into more young entrepreneurs, of course, or successful young entrepreneurs. But having said that, they provide as a strong foundation group, a lot to be developed, but interest in business is one of the key important areas. I think they will reduce dependency on corporations, on MNCs, on GLCs, on governments. So the mindset at least is there. So awareness on benefits of entrepreneurship is something that we should continue to advocate, so that people can be more directly involved in the private sector market.
So when it comes to the ASEAN as a whole, I'm sure we can learn more from regions outside of ASEAN on how youth participation on ASEAN and also in terms of enhancing entrepreneurship can be strengthened. If you can give example of experiences from countries from other region or other regional blocks, how they manage to encourage youth participation.
Well, obviously youth will have different interests in every country according to their own cultures and all that. But essentially or fundamentally, they're more or less similar actually. So it's the common tools that they use, IT, retail, commercial, professional services. These are the basic clusters that they look into. You see a lot of young entrepreneurs coming up from these particular clusters. Promotion of them is important. Some countries like Indonesia again, and even Singapore, Malaysia to some extent, they try to encourage youth as much as possible, and through that they're able to give confidence to youth development. And maybe this is something that we should look at. Internationalization of youth is also important, meaning to say we have to expose the youth, Malaysia specifically, ASEAN generally, as to what is going on overall everywhere in ASEAN, what's the youth in Myanmar doing, what's the youth in Vietnam doing, and vice versa. So I think that exposure is also very, very important.
Talking about exposure, don't you think when it comes to the awareness of ASEAN is still very, very low? I mean, I give example of Malaysians. If you just do like a rough survey down the street, probably the best you can get, 1 or 2 person might have heard of ASEAN or might have known something to do with ASEAN. But in reality, has the government done much, or maybe not the government, but also the private sector done much to encourage people to know more about ASEAN?
Yeah, it's true. The ASEAN Secretariat conducted an independent survey, and Malaysia turned out the lowest in terms of awareness. Yeah. By no means does it mean that we are the lowest performing. Actually, it's on the contrary. So I think if you ask me, Malaysians, we are relatively strong economy in ASEAN. So Malaysians tend to look beyond ASEAN. So again, like I said, the common problem that we have is we're not looking to our neighbours enough. And this is maybe something that we should instill. I think at public sector negotiations and discussions on policies, they've implemented a lot of conducive policies. It's just a matter of the private sector being able to capitalize on it. I mean, also at the same time, there are certain things that I would like to highlight here. Say, for example, the ASEAN Free Trade Area, 99.6%, Malaysia included. So there are a lot of people who are trading under the ASEAN Free Trade Area, but they don't realize that they're trading under the ASEAN Free Trade Area, see. So they look at other agreements like the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, with the ASEAN 6, plus 6, and everything else. But they should look to their neighbours a lot more. And I think at private sector, now with Malaysia being the chairmanship in 2015, taking over the chairmanship 2015, ASEAN-BAC as the private sector or the mandated private sector representative in the ASEAN Charter, we're looking to create as much awareness as possible and engaging the private sector through various activities. So we've got a full calendar ahead of us, at least 2 activities a month. So we're engaging chambers of commerces, professional bodies. We're doing roadshows. We're going to the rural areas and good business practices, as I mentioned. We're engaging the larger corporations. We are engaging ourselves with people who require or who have feedback with cross-border infrastructure facilitation. We give our feedback and recommendations for access to finance. We're doing a lot of things, and hopefully we'll have that will translate into a productive and effective chairmanship for Malaysia 2015.
So all the best. Thank you very much for sharing your view.
Thank you for having me.